Yate, Pete Sands here, and I'm here with another episode of Coffee Before Honky Tonky. Now in this episode, we'll be talking to my brother from another mother, my good friend, Mr. Raoul Trujillo. Now we traveled all the way out to New Mexico to his homestead in Truchas, New Mexico. He's well known for his role in Apocalypto for the character known as Zero Wolf, the big bad villain of the movie. And also his role as Taza on the hit TV show on FX called The Mayans. And also, another big role of his coming up is in a DC movie called Blue Beetle. He'll be playing a villain? Maybe. I don't know. But Raul's been a stand-up guy, man. He's been a good friend of mine for a couple years now. I've been to his home many times, and we talk movie, we talk about indigeneity, we talk about horse, we talk about connection with nature. Raul's got many great life experiences, something that he can share with our viewers and young people who want to get into the acting world of things. So enjoy this episode with my brother Raoul Trujillo.
Welcome to the home of the obscure, where the creative meets the calluses of blue collar, under the vast blanket of stars that the coyote himself threw into the skies. This is Coffee Before Honky Tonkin', with your host, Pete Sands.
So we're here with another episode of Coffee Before Honky Tonkin' with your host, Pete Sands. And I got a very special guest here, my good friend, my brother from another mother, Mr. Raoul Trujillo.
It's good to see you, man. Glad you made the trip up.
Yeah, man. Love your house here, out here in New Mexico. We were talking earlier about the last time I was here. It was like almost 2 years ago. And you did a lot, man.
Well, it's like when I'm not working, I just keep working. But it's actually fulfilling the dream, you know?
So how you been, man?
I've been good. It's going through lots of changes, as I think we always do as artists. But what's important to me is to keep the home front solid.
Yeah.
You know, because this is where we recharge, right? This is our recharge station, our sanctuary. So when I'm not making movies or doing any of that, this is what I'm doing: building stables and horse panels and things.
Yeah, you gotta. I love your black horse, man.
Kasra, everybody loves him.
He's a huge, gigantic horse.
Yeah, he's ready for you to ride. He's only meant for big guys. Or actually Zia, who's a little one. She's a little girl, but you should see her ride that guy. She's amazing.
Zia, shout out to Zia. She's a damn good horse person all around.
Oh my God.
All around. She's such a good person as well.
Yeah, she's crazy, but that's why she's perfect in my life.
So tell us about you, man. Where are you from?
I am born here in New Mexico. I'm a Genisaro. My bloodlines are all from this land: Ute, Apache, Comanche, and I was raised in the Pueblo communities. And then my people ended up mixing with all the, I'm not going to call them the colonizers, because the Moors and the Jews were escaping the same kind of genocide and same kind of madness over there in Spain. So, but they managed to mix with all my people here. So I sort of consider myself a product of the colonial orgasm. You know, this is
no better way to put it.
That's kind of it, man. I mean, you know, when you sort of get rid of people like the Catholic monarchs did, and they're coming to this new land to look for a new life, and they're only men.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, what are they going to do? They're going to mix with the indigenous population, and that's what they did for 500 years. But, you know, I feel special being from New Mexico, you know, as you know, from your own homelands. It's when you're rooted in the land and you're rooted in the place of your ancestors.
Yeah.
There's just nothing like it. Nothing comes close to feeling empowered, because you're connected to the land and you're connected to those ancestral roots and those bloodlines.
So in all your traveling, you left here and ended up coming back here.
Yeah, that's true. I think it was the plan. I really do. I still remember, you know, being really, really young in high school still, and I ended up doing this project about what the future looked like for me, and it was really, really interesting. I ended up, you know, painting scenarios of being in paradise, and that's what Truchas is. You know, the mountain peaks that are here, the waterfalls that are up in those mountains, and it's the source of water. And I saw that. I knew that because this is where I hung out as a kid all the time, up in these mountains. So I knew that I was destined to leave and explore the rest of the world. But ultimately, I knew I'd come back home and do what I'm doing now, which is raising horses and riding horses.
So I didn't notice before about you, but we just recently got to know each other.
Yeah.
And I was really, really, I really appreciate and grateful that you invited me out here to your house the first time I came out here. But I had no idea at the time that you were a veteran, that you served in the Army, man.
Yeah, that's true.
Tell us about your time in the Army.
I was a rebel back then even. I mean, to be honest with you, they almost threw me out twice. It was my way out. I mean, when you're from New Mexico and, from, family that didn't have a lot of means, I mean, you have several options. In my family, I was witness to, you either went off to college and got more of a academic education, or you went to prison, or you went to the Army. You had those three options. And I come from a military family. My grandfather served in World War I, my father in World War II. So it just seemed logical to go that route because it was sort of a family tradition. But I also knew that I wasn't really a soldier in the making that way, because I didn't really believe in how America polices the world. But that didn't interest me at that time. At that point, I was really interested in just getting out of New Mexico, and what better way to get out and see the world than to be in the Army. So I went straight to Germany, and that kind of started the whole opening my eyes up to a whole new world out there. But it was tough because I wasn't really a good conformer.
Yeah.
I didn't want to play by the rules, and the Army's all about rules. I remember walking around base, and we used to call them cunt caps. You know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah. And mine would be always off to a little tilt, hands in my pocket, and I'd have some captain going by with the infantry unit barking at me like, "Soldier, get your hands out of your pocket," and this and that and the other. So I was a rebel, but I knew how to play the game eventually. But they tried to throw me out twice because of crazy experiences. Escaping to Amsterdam, coming back late.
During your time in the service, you said you stayed over there for the entire 3 years in Germany. You didn't come back.
That's right. Well, I fell in love. I fell in love with this amazing German woman who, girl. I mean, seriously, she was 16, I was 18. We were just children. But I was experiencing this awakening to other cultures outside of everything I knew here in New Mexico. And that was exciting to me. And so I just wanted to absorb as much as I could. So I did. I used the time to travel all over Europe. Turkey, Spain, England. I went everywhere. You could get on a military hop and you were somewhere else. So it was I just knew that I was this adventurer. It was in my blood to be an explorer, I think, from, when you think about those first Moors and Jews escaping Spain, that's what they wanted. They wanted an adventure, new experiences. And I think that was in my DNA. So that's what I followed. I followed that sort of intuitive drive to just explore and absorb as much as I could of languages and other cultures. So after your service, you come back here. After you get out of the Army, what was your plan, man? I didn't really have a plan. I thought, all right, well, I'm going to go home and I'm going to see family for the first time in 3 years. What am I going to do? I don't know. But I think it sort of guided my life as being sort of an improviser. But the first thing that occurred to me is like, okay, I need to get a job, but what can I do? I learned to ski here. So I learned to ski here in New Mexico as a kid. So it just seemed logical to call up Ernie Blake, who ran Taos Ski Valley, who was Swiss. And I called him up. And that was back in the day when you literally could call somebody and they'd answer the phone. You didn't have to set up appointments and text. He answered his phone. And I introduced myself and spoke to him in German.
Wow.
And he was just like, what the fuck? Who is this guy? And he said, yeah, of course, of course I want to meet you. So I went up to Taos Valley. We had a meeting, and we talked about that. He was military as well over there. But he had his own agenda, because he started Santa Fe Ski Basin in Taos Valley, and he was a real eccentric. So he saw that he could use me for his own purposes, because I spoke several languages by then. I spoke French, I spoke German, I spoke Spanish. So he knew that I would be a really good asset to him running, with his ski base. And so basically I was like this private guide for all his rich European and South American friends skiing the mountain. But that's what I knew. But it just seemed logical to call him up and ask for a job. And he was amazingly gracious and gave me the job and let me do what I love doing, skiing.
So how did you get into the performing arts? How did you get into that?
Well, I think I was always interested in that throughout all my, junior high and high school. And I had really good drama teachers and was doing plays at that early age. So I knew that it was something that I loved, but I just, thought more practically, because, I had a father who was very practical. Get a job, get a car, get married, have kids, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I don't know about that. But after skiing at Taos one winter, he sort of hooked me up so I could go down to San Carlos de Bariloche in Argentina and ski there. And on my way down, I traveled. I literally hitchhiked, busted, and just took 3 months to travel all through Mexico, Central and South America to get to Argentina. I only made it as far as Panama. And then I turned around and came back because I was like, you know what? I don't want to do this anymore. Because of those 3 months, I had experienced like incredible ceremonies with the Tarahumara, the Lacandonian Mayans. I had so many great experiences with indigenous people down there in ceremony and exposing myself to those cultures. And that's when I realized, now I know what I want to do. I want to go back to New Mexico. I want to go back into the theater, and I want to find a way to implement all of this knowledge now and experience into theater. So I came back to Santa Fe and got into the theater. And one of my old teachers from school was launching a production, and it was a play Equus, Peter Schaefer's play Equus, and that was my beginnings in Santa Fe. Paid for it, I couldn't believe it. But, back in 1977, getting paid like, $350 a week to be an actor, so my dad didn't think it was funny. He was like, get a real job. And I go, dude, I have a job. And he goes, what are you doing? I go, I'm a horse in a play. And he was like, you're fucking crazy.
So you almost made it down to Argentina. That was your goal, was to get to Argentina.
That was my goal, to get down there and ski some more. But I think I realized by then, as much as I love skiing and as much as I love being on the mountain and feeling that kind of power, but I wasn't really cut out for that lifestyle. The lifestyle was about party and, it was like an intrusion on the mountain. And that sort of conflicted with my attitude about how I felt about the mountain. Mm-hmm. I mean, the mountain, for me, it was like a sacred dance. Coming down that mountain, using your force with the force of the mountain and that speed, that momentum that you get, but carving your way down. I mean, that's like an art form. It really was. Skiing was my first sort of turn on to what it felt to feel freedom. Yeah. To feel freedom and just, that's the only word I can think of, freedom. But it wasn't enough for me to be a skier anymore and just be part of that lifestyle. I really felt like I wanted to create art, but I also felt like I wanted to bring my experiences with all these different cultures that I'd been part of, but find a way to implement these stories into theater. And that was back in the day when, everybody was doing plays. So it seemed logical for me to use dance as a way in. So, I did go out to LA. I studied for a little bit, dance. I knew nothing about dance, formally. But because I was a skier, I felt like, well, I know how to move. And, I'm a risk taker. So that's how I entered that whole world of being on stage. And I was fortunate. I just feel like by following my intuition, I was guided to all the right places, you know. So I ended up in Toronto, hooked up with Toronto Dance Theatre, got a scholarship there. A year later, got another scholarship in New York City with Nikolai Dance Theatre. So I found myself fully immersed in the world of dance. And that seemed now, okay, I'm in a place now where I can create and do indigenous contemporary dance and bring these stories, bring these legends, bring these experiences, and bring them to the stage. So that really took up sort of 10 years of my life before I even, you know, got into television and film. First, actually.
So what was your first, you know, your first film experience? What was your first film that you were in?
My first film, which I will still never forget because it was an amazing experience. It was a sequel to Scanners, which was a David Cronenberg film.
Yeah.
And this was Scanners 2. Because back in those days, they just named 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it was Scanners 2. And, you know, I got the first experience of, like, the casting process, how crazy that is. Because it ended up being me, Kim Coates, who's an actor that I hugely respect for Sons of Anarchy, but he's done lots of great things, Canadian actor. He was up for the same role. But our director and cameraman was half Algonquin Indian from Quebec. And he was like, I'm going to get an Indian to play this role. So it was Kim Coates or me. And then the other two characters, the protagonist rather, was either a blonde guy or a dark-haired guy. So if it was going to be the blonde guy, it was going to be me. And if it was going to be the dark-haired guy, it was going to be Kim. But he went with me because he really felt like, you know, I want to give this to a native actor. Mm-hmm. And so that was my first film. And it was amazing because it was filled with movement. And I had already learned by then that that's how I inform my characters. How do they move? Mm-hmm. You know? But yeah, that's my first film. I still never forget it. It was so much fun.
I mean, just imagine, like, the beginning when you were first starting out, you were probably in the running with other well-known legends like yourself now, like Wes Studi, Graham Greene. Did you guys ever, like, run into each other?
Well, we did. I mean, but we weren't up against each other for the same roles because the age difference. But no, Graham is actually the one that really got me in the business. He's the one, because, you know, I was doing theater up in Toronto with him, with a company called Native Earth for the performing arts, doing great plays. And, you know, Graham was just one of those guys that I was just mesmerized by him as an actor, as a performer, the fearlessness that he had. And he was such a great guy, but he came up to me and said, dude, you should be in the movies. And there was a big casting call for, what was it? It was a Canadian thing. I don't remember now. But he didn't get it. But he's the one that said, you know, you should go meet my agent. And that's the kind of generosity that I feel I want to do as well for other people. But Graham did that for me. He sent me with his agent, and I got my first gig that way. But so, yeah, we were never in competition with one another.
Well, what's the difference between, you know, doing a play and doing a movie, doing a film?
Well, first of all, you have a longer process to prepare for theater. It's definitely much harder because you've got to memorize a whole play, which is like an hour or something on stage. You got to be in it, but then the beauty of it is that when you're on the actual stage and performing, it changes and you learn to adapt to an audience and the way that the audience responds and receives the play and the way a different actor feels one night to the next. So it's a really freeing experience. Whereas film, you know, you have multiple takes. You get it wrong the first time, you do it again and again, again, again. You only learn your lines for that particular day. So, but there's a freedom in theater that comes from the inherent investment into the work. But as years went on, I learned how to experience that same freedom in film. But it took a while. Yeah. Because film is so much more technical, you know, hit your spot, find the light, do all that. And, you know, you work with an actor who's not really there, or not present, or not even there sometimes physically. Sometimes you got a little X and you go, oh, this is where because you got some big movie star actor who's just not available. But But both of them force you to live in your imagination. You have to create everything for yourself sometimes. But the stage, I don't know. I still feel something really special about being on stage and having that audience, that immediacy in performing.
In the music, what I've learned in the music business, in my time on stage, we call it reading the crowd.
Yeah.
Where you read the crowd, they react to certain songs, and you're like, all right, let's stick to this.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you're talking about, reading that crowd.
Yeah.
And playing with it.
Yeah.
And there's nothing worse than playing for a crowd where they're not into it.
Yeah.
And it's so strange because you're like, what are you doing here if you don't want to be part of this experience?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you're talking about the early days of theater and film. What was it like with indigenous representation in the early days?
Well, in early days, we're talking, 1989, 90, and that was sort of the first big boom. But where are the trained actors? There weren't that many. Trained native actors. There weren't that many at all. I was fortunate to be in Toronto, Canada, where there were more than there were in the U.S. Because, U.S. being part of the Hollywood machinery, didn't care about authenticity on any level. So let's just get dark-skinned people, doesn't matter. But up in Canada, it was just a different reality. But I think it's because Canada already was fostering such a great theater scene. Yeah. And even though the same traumas happened to Native people there than as in all the Americas, but I feel like I don't know, there was a intactness in being Native up there. I mean, I just felt like people were in their element, and there was no shame in it. Where I felt in the U.S., there was just so much shame and trauma still attached to feeling free. And up there, I don't know. I mean, I was watching Graham, Tantu Cardinal, Gary Farmer. I mean, these are all the actors that I was working with, but in the theater. Yeah. And they were fearless. So it was just a different climate. But the representation was there because people saw, all right, these people are skilled, they're technicians, and they're crafted. And they almost saw beyond the fact that, I just experienced a big difference in the U.S. It was like, there aren't enough good Native actors to be in lead roles and all that. Well, it wasn't true in Canada. It was exactly the opposite. These people were all in lead roles. So these were my peers at the time. So it was just easier to fall into a respectful, crafted scene than it was in the U.S. I don't know. I always wanted to ask, indigenous actors, like, how is it when you have to learn, when you're casted to play a character from a different tribe and you got to learn that language? I mean, how hard is that? Well, you can imagine it's very hard. But again, coming from a place where I had already learned languages, I mean, I grew up in a community that was trilingual. All around me, Tewa was spoken, Spanish was spoken, English was spoken. So I already felt like I had a head start into language. And so by the time I got to Europe and then learned French and learned German, a little bit of Italian, I mean, language was already, the brain apparently adapts. Once you learn more than one language, the brain just is able to receive more. So for me, it was still challenging. And there were some languages that were harder than others. I mean, like Mohawk to this day still. I've done 2 projects in Mohawk. Please, don't give me another Mohawk project. That is the hardest language to learn, but they're all incredible languages. But it's a difficult process. But I personally don't want to just memorize, dialogue, period. If it's in English, I don't want to just memorize it. You still have to speak it. And you have to come from a place of some truth in speaking it, so it seems authentic. So I use the same approach always for every indigenous language I learned, because I first went through learning sounds and phonetics, and then once I got into that, then I would break down all this phonetic into meaning. And what's interesting about native language is that it's circular. It's a circular language. It's not a linear language. You know what I'm talking about, right? So that became, once you learn syntax with language, then you can get meaning, because there's nothing worse than, we've all seen it, with even, English-speaking actors who have to, learn another language that's not theirs. You can tell that they're not speaking it because there's no meaning behind it. They're just muttering sounds. So that's the challenge, is to take language that you don't know at all. It's not part of your experience, but try to find meaning and convey that meaning. So it's a long process. It's twice the process that a regular actor would do if he was, doing a role in their own language.
So what would you say was your most challenging role that you've done?
The most challenging role? I think it was a series for the BBC Sky Television. It was called Jamestown.
Yeah.
And because they were huge monologues, and very little time to learn it. And when you're thrown a language that you don't speak, and you got to learn it. And the first time was all right. The first season was okay because I actually had like a month to work on dialogue. But then towards the end, they started, going for their shortcuts, and it's like, oh, let's just fly them in for that week. But in that week, you've got to learn a whole language. That was the most challenging because, I'm a perfectionist, so I want to be able to learn a language, speak it, so that a native speaker can understand me. That's just the way that I am. But that was definitely probably the most challenging because I had such little time. And actually, there were two projects, because there was Hochelaga, which was a piece in the language with Mohawk again, which is probably one of the hardest languages ever. Huge monologues. And I mean, it just was not coming. So I understood then how, you have to make it work. And what I ended up doing was getting earbuds. But it didn't mean that I was cheating. It just meant that, what I was listening to was myself.
Yeah.
But recorded with my coach, working it out, finding the right pacing, finding all that, but working it that way so that when I was listening to it on the earbuds, I would stay with that pacing. So again, double focus, because you have to perform for the camera, perform with your other actor, but you're responding to being fed, in the earbuds with this language, which again is another technical skill, I believe. I don't think it's a cheat; it's a technical skill.
Yeah.
Because as an actor, it's like you can't ignore your surroundings. And if that's part of your reality here now is earbuds and then still being in the scene, it's a double challenge.
So what would you say your most, what people know you most for what role is probably Apocalypto?
Yeah, Zero of Apocalypto. I mean, that's still sort of my calling card. I go into a room and people are always like, oh my God, I love that movie. I love Zero Wolf. And I was like, yeah, it's a great film. It was a great character. For sure.
That was definitely a revolution in film for the times. I mean, it was all in Mayan language.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, there's a collective amnesia that happens with people in the business, especially when they get excited about their own projects and their own things. I mean, a good example right now is I just saw Wakanda Forever, which I thought was amazing. But again, their hype they're using is first time indigenous Mexicans in a major movie. And it's like, you forget, 16 years ago, we did Apocalypto, and it was all in Mayan.
Yeah. There
was no English at all. You didn't go back and forth. But it was definitely revolutionary, and it was why they didn't want to fund it. They were not going to give Mel the money. He did it on his own because he had the chutzpah to just realize, no, I want to do this completely in Mayan. And what it did is it showed the world that Mayan is still spoken and that there are still Mayans there. So it was a big wake-up call, I think, for everybody. It's like, we're here. we're real people,
Yeah.
and we still speak a language, and are active participants in a way of life that is still around. That was huge.
So we were talking earlier about the old way of filming, like practical sets, practical locations,
Real film.
real film. Now you have a lot of green screen, digital films, digital filmmaking.
Yeah.
And which do you prefer?
Well, it's not. I don't think it's not about preferring. Like I did a project just recently, and it was actually shot on film. It was amazing. You don't know the difference really as a performer. Really, you don't. But I mean, like the one thing, Apocalypto, people forget too. That was the first completely digitally shot film. So Mel was actually able to edit as we went, and we were able to see what was lacking, whatever. I do have a funny little story about one scene. I went up to it at one point. I says, Mel, we need to reshoot this scene. And he's like, why? It looked great. And I go, watch it again. Because in the scene, it was the opening. It was not the opening of the film, but it was the first time we were going to see the Volcanes, the warriors, and Zero Wolf. And so the camera literally starts low and crawls up the side of my body, exposing all the bones and that incredible costume and tattoos and everything else, and gets up to my face. And Mel's talking to the cameraman, and he's basically saying something to him that I interpreted he meant it for me. We got prosthetic teeth and everything else. And he's saying, more jaw. And he was talking to the cameraman to focus on the jaw that was on my skeletal sort of helmet head.
Yeah.
And I think he's talking to me, and I'm over here going, more jaw. And at one point I'm like, Mel, I can't give any more jaw. So when we played it back and I pointed out to him, I go, and he goes, oh my God. So we did. We had to reset the whole thing up, which, it was a major setup. But that was the beauty of shooting digitally, is that you could see shit like that and then fix it. Whereas film, you don't know until they're already in the editing room, and then you do reshoots like months later.
You told me that during the Apocalypto, you were able to keep some souvenirs, or a souvenir from filming your character, which is your shoulder pads.
Yeah. I just thought they'd come in handy because back in those days, I used to go to Burning Man a lot. And Burning Man for me was always a way to be living in the modern world, but go out and live in sort of a tribal society that was kind of sci-fi, post-apocalyptic, but a collective sort of artistic community. So yeah, it was like a way to sort of, it's like without putting regalia on, going to the power and dancing, whatever else. It was like Burning Man was a way for everybody to put on outfits and things that represented who they really were. And for me, it was always kind of like this sort of Mad Max, kind of Indian warrior. That was always my thing. So, I mean, I was like full kilt on and boots, and then these shoulder pads that were from Apocalypto, and just blue hair. I mean, it was just a way of just being expressive, So it was good fun.
So, we talked about what it takes to be an artist. The greatest artists always have some sort of trauma with them. And, the greatest songwriters I've known, even to this day, some of them have that demon, that monkey still on their back. Do you think, trauma, I think it's the way we deal with things is just art helps us heal, or helps us address those in a certain way. I mean, and when it really hits home with Native Americans, because Native Americans, they don't have those, like you were talking about, performing art schools.
Yeah.
They don't have those institutions to learn about acting or performing arts. I mean, how would you tell a young Native person, how would you encourage them to follow this acting dream of theirs? Like, how would you tell them to start?
That's a hard one, because I've been asked lots of times, what advice do you give me to start? And usually my answer would be, first of all, if you need to ask that question, it's not for you, because you just know. But I think addressing the trauma issue or the shadow, the darkness that I think all humans experience at one point in their life or several points in their lives. For me personally, it was the driving force, because to experience any kind of trauma, and definitely I've had my fill of it very young. And so by the time I was a young adult, I mean, I felt like, fuck. I mean, I wanted to be dead. I wanted the world to be over. The pain was just too much. But I remember having this breakthrough, because I'm also a dreamer. I really believe that, and I think that's part of, it's part of our cultures anyway, is to be dreamers, because we live in this waking world, but we live in a dream world. And how do the two meld? How do they find their way to coexist?
Yeah.
And so for me, at that point, I think I was about 24 and living in New York City. And I mean, I really was. I was literally walking on the streets of New York City waiting for somebody to take me out. But I was going to give them a fight. And actually, it was interesting because people were crossing the street. There's nothing worse than seeing somebody who has nothing to lose. And people will just cross the street and just like, fuck, I don't want to go near that guy.
Yeah.
But it was also the time where I was at my most vulnerable, and where I felt, what is there? I mean, the pain was just so intense. And it was through performance. And it ended up being a solo work that I ended up doing on a rooftop, kind of renegade theater, really. Because it wasn't a theater setting and all that, but it was a group of dancers that put together pieces of work. And mine was based on part of my trauma, which was I lost somebody very, very young, the love of my life that I was talking about, the German woman that I met. And even though the pain was so great and almost like I just didn't feel a way out of it. But once I lost myself into the creative process of creating a solo based on her death, her actual murder, but informed by dreams.
Yeah.
I mean, I dreamt it, like by my subliminal mind, whatever it was, whatever you want to call it, the collective consciousness allowed me to create a scenario, to create a solo performance where I was able to be both victim and murderer, both vulnerable and somehow find resurrection in it. But it was through art, through performance, that I was able to realize there's power here. There's power here because it informs us that we can escape so much pain, so much trauma, so much whatever it is that holds us back. And so I think now, I mean, because I ended up doing a little stint teaching 2 semesters at the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe. And as we were talking at one point too, to me it seemed almost like there was a fine line between it being therapy and it being, an acting, theater class. Because they kind of go together. Art, I don't care what it is, whether it's music or painting or whatever else, it comes out of seemingly nothingness or else experience. And so now I would tell somebody young who would ask me about that, well, first of all, you need to get in touch with the shadow self, that darkness in you that could allow you to be a victim or allow you to keep a lifestyle of abuse, whatever it is. Or you could really dig deep and find it and find the source of power that comes out of confronting it. And then you can use it for whatever kind of performance or a song. I mean, that's the best way, is to be a channeler of this kind of trauma and pain and turning it into something else. I mean, I personally, I'm one of those guys, people are like, why do you keep playing sad music all the time? And I'm like, it's fucking beautiful. I mean, there's nothing to me better than an acoustic guitar and a singer just singing about pain and all. To me, it's just like, that's soothing to me because it's a way of transforming it.
Yeah.
And, and once you add a melody or once you add all of the nuances that come from whatever kind of performance it is, that's where you find the beauty and the beauty that is life. And life is filled with darkness as much as it is light, pain as much as it is, joy. So That's why I would tell somebody now is like, be prepared to explore the darkness in you, to find your true, authentic voice.
There's I'm a huge fan of Townes Van Zandt.
Yeah.
He was a prolific songwriter.
Absolutely.
Loved songwriting. And he wore his heart on his sleeve, man. You're talking about vulnerability. And that's what an artist, I wouldn't say a true artist, but an artist in any sense, if they really want to connect with people, they have to be vulnerable.
Absolutely.
Vulnerable, but at the same time, being vulnerable is scary because you're basically like, cutting yourself open and being like, take care of me.
Yeah. Or see me.
Yeah, see
me. Yeah.
Like, see me without a mask. And there's also that, people who do wear a mask, that's probably who they really are. Mm-hmm. So there's so much in that. What you just said is beautiful, man. The vulnerability, being open, and a lot of things that I've talked about. I do a lot of conference work on Indian reservation, Navajo reservation. I always talk about communication. I said one thing that a lot of Native households lack is communication.
Yeah.
Talking to each other, listening to each other, and being able to say, Native men to talk about their feelings, to talk about their emotion, and not be chastised for it or belittled or feel like I shouldn't have said that.
Yeah. Well, and especially because it goes back to the trauma inflicted. Because I remember my father, who was really, really a hard, intense man. When he smiled, it was like a blessing. But he rarely did because he carried so much trauma and shame, so many things. But I remember we had this huge confrontation at one point. I was still quite young. I was probably, well into my 20s, late 20s. And ever since that encounter, and he ignored me for like 2 weeks, just wouldn't fucking talk to me at all. He was just so pissed off at me that I dared sort of challenge his ideas about what he felt, was to be a man in this world and everywhere else. And then after about those 2 weeks of silence and sort of chastising me, I just confronted him. He came home one day because, I would talk to my mom the whole time and just say, Mom, I don't understand. It's like, how do I break through with Dad here? And he just doesn't get me. He doesn't respect me, blah, 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 blah. And I just confronted him one time on the stairs coming up the house. And I just stopped him in his tracks and just told him, Dad, I love you. And we might not agree on how things are done, but it doesn't mean I don't love you. And, I respect you. But it's not because I disrespect you that I'm doing all this. It's because I'm honoring me and my dreams and all this. And after that time, and he cried. And then after that time on, he cried so much about anything. I mean, I don't say anything, but he allowed himself now to accept that it's okay to be a man and to cry and to feel things. And he became a totally different person after that. And they continued to be that person for like another 40 years because, he died when he was 95. But towards the end, it's to see that transformation happen.
Yeah.
And again, had I been one of my other brothers, it just never would have been talked about, never would have been dealt with or anything else. But the fact that I was allowing myself to be vulnerable and break molds and break patterns, and I was able to basically open my heart up right in front of him and say, okay, now what are you going to do? It's open. Are you going to shit on me again and fucking chastise me? Or are you going to just be real? And it just changed everything.
That's great, man. I mean, that's a great example of, what we were just talking about. Yeah. Being able to open yourself and being vulnerable. Here at your ranch, man, you got beautiful horses here.
Yeah. They're my medicine.
Yeah. Talk about your connection with horses here.
Ever since I think I was 5 years old, I was really, really a little kid. And we went up to my grandfather's ranch up in the Mora Valley here in northern New Mexico. And my cousin, who was already a young man, he was riding this horse. And I was like this wee kid looking up at this amazing animal and then this man on it. And he recognized that look and was like, you want to go for a ride? I was like, yeah. And he pulled me up, gave me my first ride. And from that time, I was hooked. I was like, I want to. And from that time on, I'd see horses out in fields, and I would lure them with apples and grasses and just jump on them, grab them by the mane, ride them until they stopped, and then I got off. And because I just felt these animals had such power. I mean, they could waste you so quickly.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there was this incredible loyalty that they had. And once you connected to them, I mean, like when I saw Avatar, that was the only thing I got out of Avatar that was positive. Was when they get their hair connected. I was like, that's it right there. It's a symbiotic relationship that you have with horses. I think you can have with dogs too, but I mean, horses for me are the real deal just because they're so big, so powerful, and they allow you to ride on them and go for these freedom rides, as I call them. Because there's nothing like it. There's nothing like that. I mean, yeah, I'm sure if you were a race car driver, you'd get that same kind of exhilaration. But this is horsepower. This is like an animal with another animal, and you connect and you ride hard. And if you fell or whatever, boom, you're dead. Yeah. So there's this exhilaration that comes with it. So it's kind of, again, I think it's part of that shadow light world. You face your fear.
Yeah.
Riding a horse, I think, especially at those full tilts and all that and crazy terrain, whatever else. But for me, those horses are medicine for me. I mean, my oldest one is about 30. He's this beautiful Appaloosa, and I've had him for almost all those years. I think I've had him 25 years. And, when I still go up and, feed him as we went this morning, it's just like those little nudges he gives you. And sometimes he can be an asshole, because you get in the mix, you get too close to his mare, he'd fucking kick you, but at the same time, there's this sweetness that comes. So they're kind of, for me, they're just an example of like, they're fearsome. Mm-hmm. I mean, they could, like I said, they could just fucking kill you.
Oh, yeah.
But yet there's this gentle side. So that kind of mirroring, I feel also in myself, but I use it when I act. I mean, otherwise I'd probably be a killer. I'd probably be a killer live. I see some shit I don't like and boom, 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 I'll take it out, So it keeps me from being, a killer and just a really bad guy is the fact that you don't have to abuse power. So horses, for me, just represent how power can be manifested and not tamed, but contained and channeled in a really beautiful way. And I just feel like that's what they give me as a human being, as a man. They give me that same sense of this is what I can do with my life, my power, and my sense. I can either be destructive and, use it in a bad way, or else I can use it in the best way. So I use horses as reflections of how I can be just a better human being. It's like being with any animal. You see how they coexist within their herd, their pack, and you just realize, wow, life is so easy. Just watch animals and see how easy life is. It doesn't have to be complicated.
So there's definitely a common sense to it, being around animals, especially horses. Horses kind of, I have our kid now, our oldest kid's learning to be barrel racing, and she had a pretty bad spill, and it kind of, I remember talking to her, I was like, you know what? You know how many times I fell off a horse? You know how many times I was kicked by a horse? I said, it's a great representation of everything you said of life.
Yeah.
I mean, your relationship with anything, your work, your life, your passion.
Yeah.
I said, your relationship with that horse is exactly like that throughout the rest of your life. You could trust something like a horse, and one day it'll be an asshole and kick you.
Mm-hmm. And then the next day, come to you all lovingly. It's just like, dude, you almost killed me. But that's life, isn't it?
Yeah.
Life will kick you, and at the same time, and then you walk another day outside and you're like, fuck, this is beautiful. Look at this night. Especially, living up here, 8,500 feet, the Milky Way just dripping out of the sky, and you just can't help but just go, fuck, how beautiful is this? How grateful am I for
That's
this?
one thing I noticed the first time I came out here.
Yeah.
Is when you invited me to stay the night. I'm like, yeah, all right. So we walked your property. It was beautiful. And then when the nighttime came, and that's one thing I always tell folks. I say, dude, there's nothing like the sky in the reservation.
Yeah.
And like like Navajo reservation where I grew up, man, you could almost feel like you could touch the constellations.
Yeah.
You feel the presence of something else there. And we know whether you believe in something higher power or just nature.
Yeah.
Nature itself. And so, we talk about your connection with horses, and you seem your spirituality seems grounded like in nature.
Yeah, I think, we come from animistic people as indigenous people. I mean, this is what we know.
Yeah.
We know how to coexist with nature. Sometimes, it's a practical adjustment, but a lot of times it's, again, it's just mirroring that magnitude and that incredible beauty. So I think that is what keeps me grounded, living away and apart. I don't live in a city. I live in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by forests, national forests and wilderness. Mountain lions come down and take one of my baby alpacas. That's their lunch. It's sad, but it's also the way that it is.
It's nature.
It's nature,
This is such a beautiful spot here.
I feel blessed for sure.
Yeah, definitely one of the best places I visited. I mean, I've always love coming out to visit you, but there's just really, we talk about the connection of land and horses and artistry, which I think, if you think like 500 years ago, what would we have been doing? Like if you weren't an actor, what would you be doing?
But the thing is see, when I first started with the American Indian Dance Theater as the director choreographer for it, it was exactly that. I mean, like you take powwow dancers, who it's all flashy and it's all very modern, and it's a really relative new form.
Yeah.
But it's old.
Yeah.
The actual roots of it are old. So you take the roots of a grass dance now in a powwow setting, gathering of nations, but then you remember, probably 100 years ago, it was actually out on the plains and taking down that grass and whatever else. So I think this is what keeps me thriving as an artist today in a very modern world where there's a separation. There's a separation. I mean, in any native language, I've never heard from any native speaker that there was a word for art in their language.
Not.
There is not.
No.
Because art in an indigenous animistic worldview is inherent to living. Mm-hmm. And the only ones that came close to it were Germans. The word that they have for what we're talking about right now is Lebenskünstler, which is like an artist of life. It could be really living artist, but it's really an artist of life.
But it's also up for interpretation. Right?
Yes, exactly. So I think when you ask me, what would I be doing back in that day? I'd still be that actor because I think that's what it was to go out on the hunt, to go out and have any experience, whatever. And you'd be around a fire, you'd be with your groups, your peers, all your pals that you grew up with. You're all there. And you reenact these stories. You reenact the hunt. You reenact. That's where all these dances come from. But we reenact. And I'm sure they were probably great comic reliefs. I got a lot of flack one time for The New World, the Terrence Malick film. Because that was a hard one for me. Because Terrence, he wanted to do the Pocahontas story. I tried to tell him, dude, you can't do it that way. You shouldn't do it that way out of respect because that's not the real story.
Yeah.
And all you're doing is using the diaries of these men, these English men who have a different worldview, and you're using that. And so I got him thinking at least and made him realize that, okay, well, what can we do to salvage it? I can't just trash my script. Oh, he really could, because when you read a Terrence Malick script and then you see what the end result is, they have nothing to do with one another.
I was like, I've seen a bunch of Terrence Malick movies that said, was there a script?
Yeah. And there actually was, but it's not what you end up seeing. So he could have actually scrapped it. But I think, New Line and all that, they were like, no. He was already having a hard time with Hollywood about any of his stuff, because his movies were 5 hours long. But anyway, back to the original point of this was, how do we fix this? How can we make it seem like there's both stories being told? So we decided that, and I say we because once he hired me as an actor, then he hired me as the choreographer to create these rituals and ceremonies and stuff. And again, dealing with people, first of all, who didn't know any of those dances from that period of time in that part of the world. What do? We couldn't do powwow dancing. Powwow dancing is sort of pan-Indian dancing really right now. I mean, it really is. It doesn't matter where you come from. Everyone does it, and it's all very modern. So what do? And I basically took it back to its roots of just walking. But how do you walk? Do you walk, hard on the planet? And I was like, I don't think these people did. They must have walked delicately and with intent every time they moved, when they hunted, the stealth that they needed to have and all that stuff. So I was coming from a point of view of how do we move as human beings living in harmony with an environment, the woods and nature. So that was the source. But, you have a limited time. You can't teach everybody what that looks like. So I got a lot of flack about, I look like a bunch of monkeys sometimes being all like, climbing up there. And I was like, yeah, well, I have no control over that, how they interpret things. But what I tried to instill was a sense of harmony and balance and a sort of a way of looking into the world that is not the way that we look at the world now, unless we're highly spiritual.
Yeah.
And I believe these people were highly spiritual. So we ended up basically doing a sort of parallel journey that the English would be represented as coarse, crass, vulgar, and all the native people would not. They'd be exactly the opposite, moving harmoniously and beautifully. That's why all those endless shots of ceremony and, honoring the sky and the water, everything else. So that was a way around it to avoid the fact that he still needed to tell the Pocahontas story from the English point of view. But to this day, we need to retell that story in the way that it is with the people who still would understand what a matriarchal society was like then, and a young girl in training to be a medicine woman, what that looks like now. That movie has yet to be made. So let's do that one.
Let's do it.
Let's do that one.
So we are coming to the end to our interview here. You want to leave us with anything?
It's always great to see you and always great to talk. I think we end up I think we dream together.
Yeah.
I think we're at a place now where we start dreaming together. We're starting to share more stories and possibilities because I think both of us are interested in telling the stories. That's been my whole journey for 40 some years is I want to keep telling stories, but I do want a healing to come out of telling these stories. That's like the most important thing for me now. And as indigenous people, we can't fight each other on this. We can't compete in that same world of like, well, we want to get there first, whatever. We need to join up together to tell these stories holistically and help sort of heal the trauma of 500 years and what that looks like. And what does that film look like in a retelling of, we've talked about it so many times, of just so much trauma that we've all experienced and people we know. But what stories can we tell now that will allow us to be seen as real human beings that exist with depth rather than just the stereotype? I mean, that's still my mission. It'll be my mission until I'm not making movies anymore. but I'll die on a horse.
I want to thank you for being on the podcast, man. Thank you for being a good friend of mine, and just keep doing what you're doing, brother.
Well, we'll see you when you walk down the aisle. But it's always a pleasure to see you, man. Always.
All right, thank you. This is Coffee for Honky Tonkin' with Raoul Trujillo, and we're out here in New Mexico, and see you guys for the next interview.
Well, it's that time once again to end the show. Bet yourself a warm meal and go on your evening drive to run down that glorious sunset. Until next time, keep that coffee brewing and that song playing. This is Coffee Before Honky Tonkin', signing off.